On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Brian Clifford. He is the Vice President and Chief Data Officer at Amica Insurance. We're going to be talking about modernizing the data and analytics function and leveraging AI to build on your core values. Hopefully, we'll be chatting a little bit about how Brian's gone about doing that at his role. I think the interesting part of this podcast is going to be is translating all these different core values into actionable insights and supporting it with AI. And we're going to talk to him about his POCs, where he's seeing the growth. We're going to maybe touch on where the roadmap looks like down the road. Brian, we've got a lot to cover. I appreciate you being on the show.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Before we start, let us know a little bit about what your company does.
Yeah, so at Amica Insurance, we're a P&C and life insurer in the U.S. We've been around for about 118 years as of about a week ago, so pretty long-standing company. And in the insurance world, we're sort of known as the leaders in customer service. So that's actually what drew me to joining the company about a year ago.
Absolutely, very cool, very cool. And I think this topic's interesting because when we talked about company core values, and you've been there for a little bit of time. Obviously, you've gotten to absorb all these core values. The actual data, actually backing those core values up, that's a whole different thing, right? So obviously, it's one thing to establish core values. The other is to actually translate them into actionable data. Talk to us about a little bit about the core values first, so that we have a little bit of a baseline.
Yeah, I mean, as a company, even before I started here, what I learned about this place was that at the heart of everything is, how do we make sure that our customers are satisfied and our employees are happy and engaged, and living great careers, right? And when you look at that historically, many years ago, you would have said, all right, it's very much a people business. And how do I interact with people? How do I sort of work through that? So where do you see data kind of playing a role in many of that? And I think for us, what we are looking at is how do we bring data to the table so that those interactions are even better? What is the backstory of knowing what the next thing I should do is? Data can help play a role in that and sort of driving next best action. We look at things like employee engagement scores and really understanding what the feedback we get is, surveys. And there's a lot of data that's out there around the interactions that we have and kind of the next thing that we should be doing to better support our customers. And how do you serve up that data in a consumable way that somebody can leverage? I think that's really what we're one of the things, at least, that we're focused on.
Interesting. Obviously, in the beginning, you mentioned that you guys are known for your customer service. So obviously, got to be a standout core value, something you guys are looking at. When it comes to working with a business and giving them data that they can take action on, are there areas that you guys are testing and trying to understand how to get even more value out of? Because obviously the show is about modernizing the function. So I guess when you're looking, obviously there's traditional metrics, the company's been around for a while. As you're looking forward and you've been there for about a year or so, how do you look for those new areas to help the business support this core value of customer service excellence?
Yeah, I mean, for us, I don't know that it's totally any different than how other companies should be looking at things, right? It's understand what your strategy as a company is, translate that down to what are the projects, initiatives, and things you should be doing, and then what's the kind of data underneath it all that should matter. I think where we start from is a different approach to what do we want to kind of anchor on our most important things we want to invest in as a company. We want to make sure that we are still the leaders in providing great customer service, but we want to do so in a way that's efficient, effective, where data can help drive us to point to the right place to spend our time. And I think it is all about how do we focus our teams and our time in the right way. And I'd say data is helping us drive that. But I'd say it's not that different than other companies that are also taking their strategy and then translating it down. We just start from a different point. Some other companies are looking at how do I bring the cheapest product to the market, and they're anchoring on that as the primary thing. And so they might look at kind of customer interaction very differently because when you translate down, you're focused on different things.
Absolutely, obviously that does make sense. As you're looking at advanced technologies, looking at other solutions that can better support core values, where does AI sit within that conversation for you guys?
Yeah, we took a pretty thoughtful approach to AI here. And obviously, it hit kind of every company back in when ChatGPT first came around. Everyone said, "All right, what do we do with this?" And I think many companies jumped to say, "How do I just dive right in now?" We actually took a pretty thoughtful approach to say, "Well, what can the capability do, and where is it going?" And for us, what are the things that as a business we're trying to invest in where this could support us. So we actually spent a good amount of time understanding our strategy and where this could play a role. We understood and researched really our teams to understand where are their pain points and what are some things that we could do to help support them. And then, from an AI kind of progress perspective, we said, let's test a few things and see, is it something that's going to help us? Early on, though, we did set that overall tone to say, our primary focus when it comes to AI is how do we support our team members to be even more effective, more efficient in actually serving up kind of their main tasks for our customers and claimants. And so that's where it really is focused. Where do we go in the future? I don't know, but certainly that is where we are now, is how do we better support and empower our teams, for that matter.
Absolutely. When you're working with your teams, obviously empowering them, giving them actionable data, all that makes sense. When it comes to advanced technologies, trying to find a good use case, I think a lot of companies are still on the voyage in the journey of, implementing this technology at different stages. But for you guys, when you're looking at identifying an ideal use case, what are you looking for?
I go back to what's practical, like what can we actually deliver on? Pretty early on, I was hearing a lot of companies were struggling to get past the POC phase. And to me, that's probably because the technology is not there and it can't quite get there, or your change management is struggling, or maybe the thing you're building is just too complex. And so for us, we said, all right, let's map all of our potential projects, initiatives, use cases, most people call them. And we said, what can we just deliver on now that we think will provide some value? And we tried that out a bit. In fact, the first thing we tried didn't work so great, so we shut it down. The technology wasn't quite there. But we pivoted and said, where else could we point? And we didn't pick the hardest thing. We didn't pick the most valuable thing, but we picked something that could get us progress. And actually, funny enough, those first couple things just kept building. It was like, okay, this seems like something. What else could we build on it? What else could we do with this? How many more people could we get some value out of this? So I think we started at kind of an easier spot than some other companies who wanted to get the kind of biggest, best out of it. And that helped us build some momentum. And actually, we went beyond POC phase pretty fast. But we also had good engagement from the teams that were using this. Like they actually said, all right, well, one, they're listening to our feedback. They shut down that one thing that didn't work. Mm-hmm. And two, we're actually seeing real life value, even though it's kind of small. Like, okay, fine, let's build on this. And I thought that was probably the best decision points that we made of like, let's just pick something that's practical and see it through. And by the way, we didn't pick the hardest tech either, because that continues to evolve, and it would be really hard to stay up to date on every latest tech when it comes to AI here. We're just picking some core things that work pretty well and trying to get value out of them.
Earlier you mentioned it's what every company does. They go out and speak to the end users, obviously identify what supports the business. I do think there is sometimes gaps, right? I think there's a reason why a lot of times data projects go unused. A lot of times technology projects can fail. I think there's requirements. The more we speak, the more it sounds like, because you guys have defined that customer service component as the core value, everything else that's stemming around supporting that is very clear. And obviously you've been there for a year. It's very clear for you. When you're looking at that and you're trying to drive business value, how do you measure that for your team, right? Because I think there's one thing to go, well, we know that's valuable to the company, but for your team on the data side, how do you guys measure value that you're delivering?
Yeah, I mean, I think our finance team would probably measure differently than I might measure too. I think, like there's certainly a numbers perspective, but to me, on the early stuff, the small things, some of the wins are people even using anything? Like, is there actual somebody who's so we're using Microsoft Copilot for we don't necessarily need to get into all the tech that we use, but that is one example of something we're actually doing quite successful with, and I'd say what we got out of that is first step, are people even interacting with it? Like, I don't care if they're actually making their lives more efficient, but you have to get them sort of engaged and playing around with it, particularly with AI. They have to understand and learn. And our early on surveys before we rolled out anything, where most people weren't using anything when it comes to AI. A couple people have tested sort of external tools and whatnot. But this was newer. And so first step is get people engaged. And then the second step is get them to actually point to something where they're like, boy, this made me faster, better, et cetera. So, it's a bit hands-on. It's a little more work than a typical roll out a project and hope that everybody sort of latches on, or, kind of they get forced to have to do something. This is very much opt-in on some of these things. And in order to get somebody to opt in, you have to get them to try it and then like it and then want to keep coming back. And that's really how we focused our rollout, particularly Microsoft Copilot, because it just sits off to the side. You don't really need to use it. I want somebody to click on it and get something out of it. So we did actually put a pretty big effort into the engagement model there, change management, adoption, all that. And so, first step, going back to your question, the value. First step was, are they using it? Second step is, what are they doing with it? And is it something where it is speeding up their effort? So that might be one metric of, how much time is spent on particular tasks. The other might be removing tasks that they're doing. So you have to actually look at it of what are the tasks they're accomplishing and what is the value there? And we have a mix of KPIs that we're measuring against to say, are we, improving time? Are we driving more value or more efficiency in that regard? Or are we producing a better product? That was a little more challenging to measure because, you'd have to have some sort of quality comparison of something. But certainly it is something that we are looking at of how do we measure quality of output as well.
Absolutely. And maybe just to touch on that, because I think it's interesting. I think a lot of teams, you mentioned some things are, at different phases, some of, at different life cycles within testing for your AI solutions. Mm. When you're trying to look at the roadmap and you're trying to think about how these products are going to grow, the costs associated, obviously you mentioned, finance views these things differently. Mm. But for you as the chief data officer, when you're looking at the costs for some of these solutions and the scaling aspect, right? It's obviously one thing. POC, fantastic, it works. But then if you're going to roll it out, well, first of all, what do you do there? How are you looking at that?
Yeah, there's probably a range of how to even look at these two. So actually every AI solution that we look at, whether it's a vendor solution for a team of 10 or one that's for, we have one that's for a couple thousand people that we're using. I would say we always have a cost benefit analysis that we do. So we require that on all AI solutions. How in depth it goes does depend on kind of the cost of everything. But certainly we want upfront people to say, here's how I'm going to use it and what I expect for value. And we have a governance committee that I chair along with my partner on the tech side, our CIO. And we kind of look through everything and we say, all right, what are the impacts to our brand, if there is any? What's the value this will create? Are there anything in the data privacy of how this will work that we should be concerned about? So we kind of do a high level review, but it's always done up front to say, hey, by the way, we're not just buying a tool or kind of licensing a software without an intent to how we'll get value out of it in here. And so that kind of review process comes up pretty often. What I see though is there are some areas where you have to take a bit of a risk. Like the cost benefit it's a projection, right? Like, hey, if we do X, this is what we'll get. And so for us, there's so many different AI softwares out there. Like every company has something now. You go to any conference, it's like, yep, here's what we're doing for AI. we wanted to make sure we partnered with sort of the bigger companies, is one of the things that we thought about. And, it's probably the safer route. We're an insurance company, so we think about risk. And I wanted to think about risk on this one. Like, I wanted companies to partner with that we know will continue to invest, that will continue to hear us out, and will make sure that they are kind of continuing to advance. My concern on some of the other companies that are more smaller niche would be, well, are we going to continue to grow our value out of this? So I want something that covers more of our user base, a company we can trust and kind of can build into. And so it might have less of an upside in some cases. Like, there might be that kind of unique startup that we could have leveraged for something that was super cheap and is going to be great, but that's not really where we want to go. And so I definitely looked at, and the team looks at, what's our risk here in our partners that we're bringing on. And so that's a bit of where we're going on this, of what are our big strategic partners when we think about our AI investments.
Interesting. And I guess when it comes to some of this strategy in your roadmap, how far can you project in the future? Because obviously you mentioned vendor selection, you have some criteria, you're trying to make sure you adhere to those. When it comes to your roadmap and what you might want to deliver, have you gotten to a point where you can incorporate some of these AI solutions in there, or is it more placeholders in the bigger plan?
It's an interesting question. When we go to roll out, or when we go to pilot anything, that's exactly what I tell the teams: it's a pilot. I am not committed to rolling anything out unless it works. And so I would say anything we have is always a placeholder, but some of them are a little firmer than others. So we do have a roadmap actually that gets us out to the end of this year at least. I didn't want to build anything beyond that. I used to always say in my old team that I'll never build a 3 to 5 year roadmap, because who knows what the technology is going to change. But a year, okay, I can project out, what do we think we're going to invest in? Where do we think we'll go? Certainly on the AI side, we're investing in our front end sales and service applications, our CRM, to sort of build out a bunch of AI components there. And then, behind the scenes, we have a lot of data governance work that we're doing to sort of get us there as well. But, the little details of, is it project A versus B, or is it this feature versus that feature? That really is a component of, we have bets which we think will kind of give us the most value, but we need the team's feedback to say, is it actually working? Is the technology where it needs to be? Is our customization, if there is any, in line? And so I would say anything is a placeholder at this point, until we get past that pilot phase.
Absolutely. I mean, that does make a lot of sense. I think, having it out this for this year even is a good thing. I guess maybe
you look at any AI company and they release something new every week at this point, so it's really hard to keep up with what's going. So
no, that's actually, I think the speed of development, and maybe that's what I was kind of asking, is how far. You mentioned vendor, picking the vendor, and my mind was, okay, well, how far can you actually commit to things, because new features are rolling out, and you have to go back, look at the requirements, you have to see what cost is, you have to go through the POC, potentially all these different things. I guess maybe a question I did want to ask you, because we did talk about wanting to support the company values, bring those actionable data to the table. When you're looking at your roadmap and you're looking at new technologies and trying to evaluate what you can bring to the table, from your perspective, you want to make sure, obviously, you're driving optimal value. We joked about the business value even and whatnot, but when you're looking at supporting your year roadmap right now and driving that value, do you look outside of that in terms of looking for value, or are you pretty focused at this point going, this is what the company needs, I support this, that's the most impact I can make? Because obviously with new technologies represents new areas, but could take away focus a little bit from what you guys are doing.
Yeah, I'm usually pretty flexible, I guess, on if somebody had something else that made sense to pivot and do, we'd certainly be open to that. I mean, it's a little challenging when we sign a contract with a vendor and say, all right, now we're committed and I have to get the value out of it. But we do make sure to leave some capacity out there to say, all right, where else could we support and should we support? The challenging thing is that if I was to take on everything that somebody had for a new idea, nothing would get done.
Absolutely.
We just wouldn't make progress. So I do think there is a little bit of a balance of some things are just kind of, we're going to continue to march forward. Ideally, we pick things that are actually getting value. And then there is some capacity that we are keeping off to the side to say, how do we like continue to pivot as needed, depending on the team that might be ready to go or that has the biggest kind of desire, need, value, prop, that kind of thing. So we do have a little bit kind of carved off to the side there for that.
Interesting. I guess for your team, as you're bringing in these new technologies, what's the process look like for your team to actually get up to speed on these tools, on the technologies to actually deliver? And I think this is something everyone in technology is facing. So obviously, love to hear how you guys are maybe dealing with it.
Yeah, I mean, just like everybody else, we're trying to stay up to speed. I mean, I think that is a challenge. If you pick a couple of core partners, you can easily stay fairly up to speed on what they deliver and what they're capable of. I'd say we lean pretty heavily on our vendors to make sure that they're sharing enough info with us. But we also actually invest a good amount in learning and development. And I would say our team on the learning and development side has been phenomenal on this. Like they actually dove right in and said, yep, let's help out. We built out kind of a core group of people who really understood some of the stuff that we're doing. And they've been helpful on our communication process. They've been helpful on the just general training and onboarding. We have internal communities that we've built around this where people can engage with each other in a sort of social media-like forum, which has been great because actually then people can ask questions pretty easily. So I would say it's a bit of us learn as we go, but we're leveraging every last thing external and every last partner we can to help us get up to speed and stay up to speed. I would also say there's probably not as much of a need to stay up to speed on, is it Gemini, X point, whatever, or is it something else? Like we're not always on top of the latest model of everything. Like that would be a little illogical for us to be thinking about. So it really is more generically in some cases, like what can this solution do for us? And then their big releases that might impact us that are different features. So it's a little easier than like trying to monitor everything that's going on and, OpenAI releases something versus, Google the next, Microsoft the next week or whatever. Like it's just, we're not staying up to, I mean, we've monitor all that, but we're not going to react to all of that immediately.
Absolutely. No, I mean, you know what? That's a great clarification because I think there's so much noise, good and bad, within the space that knowing what to prioritize, what to listen for is hard. So it sounds really fantastic what you guys are doing. Brian, man, this time has flown by, and I feel like we probably had more questions to ask, but I know you got to get back to it. If somebody's going to want to reach out to you and maybe expand on the conversation, ask you a question I might have forgotten, what's a good way of touching base with you?
Find me on LinkedIn's best. I'm happy to connect, happy to respond and meet offline. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. We'll make sure to include that in the show notes. Again, thanks for being on the show. Thank you for taking the time. All right, that's it for this episode. We'll be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I think it's a great conversation. Brian walked us through core values and how the company uses the data to support those core values. And I think we learned that customer service is definitely important to them. And they look for opportunities within technology to support that. We learned a lot about his AI strategy, his roadmap, and how he's going through vendor selection, working with his stakeholders to deliver those POCs and move things into production. So share this episode with somebody else who would benefit from it. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the show's going for you. I'd appreciate that. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.